All right, guys. Bang, bang. I've got Alex here with me. What's going on, man?
What's up, man?
How are you?
No voice left, so I don't know how I'm going to do this.
We're talking shortly after pretty big news of El Salvador in about a 4-day period went from announcing that they were going to create Bitcoin as legal tender within El Salvador, or accept it as legal tender. Then they basically put forward a bill. They voted on it. They passed it. It's now legal tender. The president jumps on Twitter Spaces. He's talking about all kinds of stuff, answering questions, like super candid. Seemed like a pretty open book. At some point, mining comes up. He's like, well, we have this volcanic energy that is 100% renewable, 100% clean, zero emission, and basically free. Maybe we could use that for mining. 24 hours later, he's literally already drilled the well and seems like he's off to the races. What the hell is going on in El Salvador?
Dude, this is, El Salvador and Bitcoin, it's like this space moves so fast. It's like 2 weeks ago, the Pope was like, we can't use Bitcoin. 2 weeks later, we've got a country putting some Bitcoin. Talk me through, from what I understood, they've made it legal tender. People who don't want to hold Bitcoin, they can actually sell it back to the government. So the government's going to hold the Bitcoin and give them fiat. Is that right?
So in El Salvador, and again, this is an overgeneralization, but there's basically two banks that you're going to hear about. You're going to hear about the central bank, right, or kind of the state balance sheet, the reserves, because they technically don't have their own currency. So there's a reserve assets of the government. Then there's this development bank that is owned by the government. The development bank looks more and feels more like a regular bank that you would see in the United States, but it's owned by the government. At that development bank, so not the reserves of the government, but at the development bank, they are basically creating a $150 million fund. They keep referring to it as like a trust fund. And the purpose of that is they will seed it with dollars, so 150 US dollars. They then create a mandate that any merchant must accept Bitcoin, not exclusively. So somebody shows up with dollars, you have to accept the dollars. Yep. Somebody shows up with Bitcoin, you have to take the Bitcoin. Now, this is very similar to in the United States. If somebody shows up with dollars, you have to accept it, right? It's a mandated thing. It is not necessarily a mandate if somebody shows up with a different type of currency, depending where you are, what the currency is, all that stuff. But in El Salvador now, dollars and Bitcoin will be mandated to be accepted by the merchants. Some merchants want dollars. Some merchants want the Bitcoin. So the merchants that want the Bitcoin, they'll accept it and they'll hold the Bitcoin. The merchants that want dollars will accept Bitcoin if somebody wants to pay them in Bitcoin. And then the government says, turn around and you sell us the Bitcoin and we'll give you dollars. So we'll give you choice as to what you hold, but you have to at least accept it for payments. And so what that 150 million US dollars is there for is basically that is the liquidity pool, if you will, that will be used to purchase from the merchants. Once it is purchased, the government will hold the Bitcoin in the trust fund or in the development fund. So 150 US dollars is eventually going to get converted to 150 US equivalent of Bitcoin, right? Depending on prices, whatever. And what's interesting is the government's basically market making. And so they are going to maybe make a little bit of money, lose a little bit of money over and over and over again. I have no clue how sophisticated this is. Is it going to be technology, or is it literally going to be bring your Bitcoin, type thing. It's there's details that still need to kind of be fleshed out here. But Strike is one of the companies that is providing a bunch of technology. Blockstream is another. And so Strike's got some pretty sophisticated ways to do conversions via an API and stuff like that. So I actually think it'll be pretty well done. And the whole idea is just now the government says, hey, we're going to make Bitcoin legal tender. You as a merchant have to accept it just like you have to accept dollars. And we'll help you de-risk. We'll give you free choice on the back end. Let's go.
Well, that piece there, the ability for a merchant to just swap it and the government being able to backstop that's really interesting. So that means that they're not only enabling the merchant side of it, but the government's actually going to put Bitcoin on their own balance sheet.
Yeah, and the way that they're doing it is it's unique because technically they can say that they're not putting it on their balance sheet yet. If you make it legal tender, though, my guess is that is the intention, is that they will put it actually on the balance sheet as well. But then they have this trust fund, and so is the trust fund the balance sheet? Technically, no, but indirectly, yes,
Yeah.
right? In that, well, it was money off the balance sheet that went into the trust fund, and therefore the government controls it, whatever. But I think that just like overarching, a nation state is adopting Bitcoin, right? And we can debate how sequentially should they do X, Y, Z, whatever, but like it's legal tender. They're going to be buying Bitcoin from people with dollars, and then now they're talking about mining.
Yeah.
What else do you want from a nation state?
I know, right? Yeah. Well, this is like, I've always thought, and I mean, all of us have been thinking for a long time, is like, how does this play out? And like, it's literally playing out in front of us. Like, and the thing is, none of us could have guessed in what order, like you said, what sequence, what pattern, what method, what mechanism would be used to do this. So actually, I didn't say anything on the day when, Jack announced it. I was like, yeah, okay, I just want to see what it actually means. But then after the call, after I dug into it a little bit, I was like, fuck, this is actually good. So this is...
What do you think the ramifications are? Like with either other countries, individuals, corporations?
Man, I've been saying this for ages. A couple years ago, probably even maybe longer than a couple, like 5 or 6 years ago, it was a risk to be associated with Bitcoin, right? It was a risk to have some Bitcoin. Now it's, more and more rapidly becoming a risk not to have an association with Bitcoin. And that game theory change, or that incentive change, can like create like a spiral effect, or like a really rapid move, like the pendulum will swing to the other end. It's kind of what's happening sort of here in America with the masks thing, right? So it's like Miami came out and said, all right, we're not doing that. And now all of a sudden then Texas came out and, someone else and someone else. So the pendulum swings back very quickly. And that kind of momentum, if you're positioned right for it, like there is huge opportunity in that momentum. And that's sort of where this is it. So it'll be really interesting to see, like, I mean, we saw the laser eyes already with a bunch of different people. So we don't know what that means yet, but I mean, I would hate to be the IMF and central banks right now.
Oh, I actually don't even know if it's necessarily combative yet. Maybe it gets there, but here's a perfect example. So we explicitly asked on the Twitter Spaces, there was a convening of heads of state. There was the head of El Salvador. There was Nick Carter, who is head of the Twitterverse. There was me, Jack Dorsey, and a bunch of other people who are the heads of the interwebs. And so we brought all these heads of state together on the diplomatic call. Kidding. And when we were all on this Twitter Spaces call, I can't remember if it was me, Alex Gladstein, Nick, whoever asked him, somebody explicitly said, hey, have you heard from the IMF or from the United States or governments or whatever? And there was kind of like a offhand, yeah, I heard about it. Hold on a second. I'm like doing something. And then other questions got asked and it almost like didn't get answered. So people started just DMing me nonstop and they were like, hey, get an answer for that. So I said, look, apologies for having asked twice, but like, what did they say? And the response that the president gave was very interesting. It was kind of nonchalant, like, oh, we're gonna have a meeting. Like, I don't think it's a big deal. He was like, actually, this is good for the United States. This is good for some of these places. And so immediately it's like, well, how? And one of the things he said that I thought was fascinating was he said, listen, the United States, one of the biggest problems the United States has with El Salvador is that a bunch of our citizens keep going there and illegal immigrating, right? And if so we have a bunch of illegal immigration to the United States and you want to stop that, the best thing we can do is make our country a place that you want to stay, that there's opportunity, that there's wealth generation, that there's safety, all this stuff. And this is a great way to do it. And so I thought that was a really, really fascinating thing to kind of unpack, where you start to say, listen, a country that is in the developing world that many people, cite the murder rate or the lack of economic growth or, whatever the thing is, now says we found a way to be more prosperous, to be more safe, to be kind of more beneficial for our citizens. And they're going to stay here. And by the way, we're going to solve one of your problems. Pretty interesting way to kind of frame it, right?
That's framing, dude. The thing is, the IMF and central banks don't care about that problem. They don't care about solving that problem. Like, if we've seen anything in the last 18 to 24 months, like their business model is one of, extracting wealth from others. Like, so central banks exist not to produce anything, but to extract. So, Bitcoin is an assault on that kind of a system. Like, you know, it exists.
It's a peaceful protest.
It's a peaceful protest, but it's still an assault on that system. Like it rips away, like it rug pulls the raison d'etre for a central planning authority.
I don't think that it actually is combative though. Like that's part of why I like Bitcoin is it doesn't do anything to the existing system. The existing system can continue to exist. For example, the existing system over the last 12 months has done a fantastic job of doing what they do best, implementing their power, doing all this stuff. Bitcoin has still succeeded and Bitcoin is a beneficiary of it, but there's no kind of combativeness to it. Like Bitcoin can actually win and there still be coexistence with the legacy system. Now, the legacy system, as we all, I think, agree, is going to lose users. But like, take Yahoo, for example, right? Yahoo was the pinnacle of the internet. It was the front page of the internet for a long time. Today, if you see a Yahoo email address or somebody's like, oh, Yahoo's my homepage, there's like a certain framing there, right? It's a certain type of person, usually a little bit older, all this kind of stuff. And it's a generalization. That's not always true. But even though younger people have all moved on to other websites, other things, other email addresses, whatever.
There's still a remnant.
Yahoo's one of the largest finance websites, for example, in the world. Yahoo Finance is massive, right? And so I think that's similar to what we're watching here, which is like there's a generational shift for sure. There's going to be some of the older generations also that transition. Bitcoin will succeed, but I don't think it's like 10 years from now, there's no fiat and it's all Bitcoin.
Not 10 years, but on a longer time.
Okay, so what do you think the timeline is?
I think
200 years?
No, hell no. No, I think
50?
It's like 3 or 4 decades.
So 30 to 40 years from now, you think that the entire fiat system's gone?
More or less, yeah. Because here's what happens: it precipitates on the way out, so it starts to fall faster and faster and faster, because what you get is you get
if there was
hyperinflation, reverse collapse, basically, right? So sorry, not reverse collapse. You get a collapse as you get hyperinflation, and hyperinflation is a confidence thing. It doesn't matter how much money you've printed; it actually is a complete confidence thing. So when the thing starts to fall apart and the confidence is lost, that's when the whole thing starts to completely collapse. So the way this is going to play out is this decade is going to be messy as fuck. So there'll be points at which, like, I think the next 3 or 4 or 5 years socially is going to get even worse. Like, you know, there'll be more restrictions, there'll be more stupidities, there'll be, you know, desperation on the part of banks and central banks and all this sort of stuff to try and fix things that they've broken, and in the process break them even more. You know, we'll sort of hit some sort of trough period, and then at the same time, like I call it, I'm going to swear now, but pockets of brilliance in a sea of shit, basically. So there'll be all sorts of crap going on, but the pockets of brilliance will be represented by kind of things like that are going in El Salvador, etc. Now, the reason I say this is because there is only one way for large nation states or central banks to exist, and that is to blanket tax or to print money. In the absence of those two tools, they actually can't fund themselves. A government, a nation state level government or a central bank is a bankrupt institution. And what Bitcoin does is it eliminates the capacity for a bankrupt institution to exist, because you can't tax the Bitcoin forcefully. Like, what you need to do is you need to provide a service in order to get someone's Bitcoin. Or you need to, so that's the only way. Or you need to beat them over the head with a club and take their private key. But, you know, if you hit them too hard, they're not going to remember it. So it's like, it changes the dynamics of how societies should function. I call it moving from an overlord-subject relationship, which is the relationship we have with governments and central banks today, moving to a customer and service provider relationship. But through necessity, that means jurisdictions are going to have to get smaller. They cannot remain large, because you cannot feasibly economically run a large region profitably. So in the absence of being able to print money and keep yourself in business fraudulently by borrowing from the future, by leeching from people, and by taxing, you're screwed. You have to provide a service, and you can't do that at scale. Like, it has to happen at a smaller scale. That's why, you know, a lot of people talk about, oh yeah, fiat and Bitcoin will coexist. They will not. Like, for a while they will, but when the thing starts falling off, like it'll be like, you know, Bitcoin's this black hole, and we're getting closer and the fiat system's getting closer and closer to the black hole. But once it hits the event horizon, it's gonna
I think it's just different times we're talking about, right? I'm talking about 10 years from now. You're talking about 40, 50 years from now.
I'm talking, a couple more decades. So I think this decade is where we get close to the thing. Next decade is probably where we start to reach the event horizon, somewhere in there. And like 2040 onwards, like you don't have fiat anymore. There's absolutely no need for it.
So if we think about this whole idea of coexistence for some period of time, I think what El Salvador is super interesting. But what should other countries do? Just do they immediately run and take the playbook from El Salvador and basically implement it in their countries, or is there different ways to do it?
100%. Take the fucking playbook and do whatever variant you need. Like this is where the small countries that have been traditionally like backwards or broke or broken. So my parents come from Macedonia. I was there last year, and like whenever people sit here and talk about like, oh, communism is great, I'm like, just go to Eastern Europe for a bit and like go specifically to Macedonia, like where there's no soul left in the country. Like everyone's like, all the youth has left, anyone with a brain has left, anyone with ambition has left. And it's like sort of left like a husk of a nation, and like it's broken. Nothing works. Everyone's defeated, and it's dead. But those places potentially have an opportunity to do something.
Well, it's just the developing world, or those that are broken nations, they have the opportunity to leapfrog the current kind of leaders. It's exactly what we see technology. It's the innovator's dilemma, and the powers that be, they're sitting cushy. And so the upstarts, the challengers, they're the ones who have the opportunity.
Exactly. But they have also the extra opportunity that they're small, so they have less space to manage and less shit to deal with. I mean, some places have a lot of crap to deal with, like, with a completely broken infrastructure. But the smaller you are, the quicker you can actually evolve into what jurisdictions are going to look like in the new world. Like they're not going to look like what they look like today.
Is there something about a smaller country also just has less bureaucracy, and there's usually kind of more centralized power in the country, and therefore they can move quicker? Like El Salvador went 4 days from announcement to having its legal tender.
Look, that absolutely helps. The thing is, some countries don't have smaller bureaucracy. Like so maybe in El Salvador it's interesting because he's got he's got some strength there. Whereas like in a dumbass country like Macedonia, you actually have more bureaucracy than America for like 1 million people. It's ridiculous. So that kind of depends. But yeah, definitely having a director or having, dictator, whatever the word is, like having someone to lead that and point, that of course is going to help.
What's fascinating to me is with the Salvadorian situation is everyone's like, oh, he's a dictator, he's this, he's whatever. I'm not an expert in Salvadorian politics, don't want to be. Mm-hmm. But I've never seen a dictator hold a vote and 25% of the Congress vote against them. Like, they just get killed, right? Like, you know what I mean? And again, dictators all around the world, bad people, the whole 9 yards. But to me, it's just, I think there's a lot of politicalization of this in El Salvador. So therefore, people outside will never understand it. When you move to some of these other countries, like Macedonia, for example, I couldn't tell you who the leader is. I couldn't tell you what the political structure is. I couldn't tell you what the process is. Yeah. I couldn't tell you I literally couldn't even tell you, is it communist? Is it democratic? Is it whatever? Again, that's just because I think most people are worried about where they live. Right. And so if we're going to play this game of every time a country says, hey, we're interested in technology, or we're interested in Bitcoin, or we're interested in, kind of a new path forward, and then we all try to scramble to become experts on those political environments, I think we're going to have a really hard time. And so instead, if you simply just say, listen, it doesn't matter if it's a democratic leader or a dictator, if they adopt this as money within their country, it prevents them from being able to do what we see other dictators do with fiat systems, right?
Well, that comes back to what we said earlier. Bitcoin naturally subverts fiat. Like Bitcoin actually, the whole Bitcoin invention is a subversion and a forking of the road from the fiat path that we're on. Like I think it's so important that, the whole aliens thing and, the great filter, right? I think if there is any other societies that hadn't made it through the great filter, they blew themselves up by either dropping a nuke on themselves, getting whacked by an asteroid, or through destroying their society through fiat. Like, because I think fiat is a necessary progression that all human species have to go through, like all Homo sapien, all sentient species. Like we naturally, like, money is the thing that permeates all of existence, right? You cannot do what you do, I cannot do what I do, and we can't, collaborate and interact without some sort of mechanism to exchange human action, right? That's effectively what money is. So money will exist from the beginning of time until the end of time, so long as a sentient species exists. The only thing that changes is the object that we use for money. Now, we have come to the point now where we had to go through salt, seashells, cattle, blah, 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 gold, paper-backed gold, the fiat abomination and all of that. But when you look at it on a longer time scale, like me and Francis Puleo were talking about this, it's like when we look back on this, if we make it through the great filter now, like if we actually can measure human action effectively, and if we can restructure the system such that positive actions spiral upwards and negative actions actually correct, right? So at the moment, we cover up negative acts. So if you do something dumb, it just gets socialized to everyone else, right? So that actually rots the system. But on a Bitcoin standard, you can actually move upwards, you can move downwards, which is really important. And downward motion gets corrected very quickly, and upward motion spirals. So in that kind of a thing, we have the opportunity, as I said, to sort of progress society. Now, on a long enough timescale, like we'll look back on this thousands of years from now, and we'll say, all right, the inventions that made Homo sapiens or humans in whatever capacity we're going to be in, like an intergalactic species, was fire, Bitcoin, teleportation. Like, honestly, internet, electricity, all this other stuff was invented for Bitcoin. Like,
that sounds big, nuts, right?
I know it does.
All right.
That's how big Bitcoin's going to be for all of those things. Like,
what is the biggest critique of that view?
My own personal critique?
No, like if you had to think of the critics, what would they say is like why you're wrong?
Bitcoin's slow. Like I think the only critique would come from someone who doesn't believe money is this important. Everything stops without money. You can't, like, you don't have the capacity to do anything. And
how do you think about like the inflation and all of the recent announcements? Like, so we're recording this, the consumer goods prices just got announced, 5% increase. It's the most since the global financial crisis. If you look at all sorts of other metrics, through May, I think in the start of 2021, inflation is at like 2.7% and likely to continue to go higher. Like, does all of that just feed into this? Is that a response to Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin just a beneficiary of what they were already going to do?
That's all breadcrumbs that fell off the side of the table. Like, Bitcoin has such a larger impact. Like, all of these things is we're just playing games. We're a bunch of, like, again, when you spread out the time scale, like, fiat is a 150, 200 year experiment on a far, 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 far longer time span. And all we're doing is we're placating ourselves. So I wrote a recent article. So I'm taking Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and then I'm writing about Bitcoin through the lens of each rule. So I'm up to chapter 2 now. Oh, I'm up to chapter 3. But chapter 2 was about Bitcoin, chaos, and order. And in there, I talk about how you've got the study of matter and the study of what matters. So the study of matter is like empirical sciences, physics, etc. And the study of what matters is things like philosophy, economics, trade-offs, psychology, etc. Now, what we've tried to do is, because the study of matter has been so effective over the last couple hundred years, particularly with the formalization of the study of matter and sciences, with the Renaissance, we have now tried to take that process and apply it to everything else. So we've tried to deconstruct economics, which is not a study of matter. Like, economics is the study of individual human beings who make actions that are different at every single moment in time. Like, you cannot replicate an economic period. Like, we can't take what happened last week and do it again this week. Like, we can't press the rewind button. So trying to distill something like economics into an empirical study is completely mindless. So doing all these things like measuring CPI and like trying to like figure all this stuff out, it's all vanity metrics. Like, none of it actually really matters. And then on top of that, they go around and they're like, okay, well, with CPI, let's just take this out. let's take this out. Let's take this out. And it's a fake metric designed to give the model some semblance of sense. So they're trying to fit reality to the model instead of the model to reality. It's the opposite way around. And so we're literally we're driving a car with a fake dashboard, with a fake speedometer, with a fake everything. And we think it's okay because the dashboard says we're driving, 60 miles an hour, but in reality, there's a fucking wall there and we're driving 200 miles an hour right into a wall, but we feel good about it.
What's up, guys? Bang, bang. I hope you're enjoying this conversation. But before we go any further, I want to quickly tell you about today's sponsor, BlockFi. BlockFi's got 4 different financial products for crypto investors. You can deposit crypto and earn up to 8.6% APY in an interest-bearing account. You can deposit crypto and take out a US dollar loan against your crypto collateral. You can use their cryptocurrency exchange and have no trading fees, or you can get a new Bitcoin rewards credit card. It's a normal credit card that when you swipe, you get Bitcoin back rather than cash back or airline miles. I'm an investor in the business and a very happy user. I think you will be too when you go to blockfi.com/pomp. Again, blockfi.com/pomp. Go check it out and let me know what you think. All right, let's get back into this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. What about all the other cryptocurrencies other than Bitcoin?
I would say at best they're attempts by people who have no idea why Bitcoin exists. So Bitcoin is a system of rules, not rulers, right? So these guys are like, oh, so Bitcoin is about sending money to each other for free. No, that's not what it is. But so they go and roll their own version of it, and they become their own rulers of their own money. So at best it's naive and stupid. At worst, I think it's a state level attack on Bitcoin. So this is an interesting attack vector, and Breedlove and I were talking about this a couple months back about the state and central banks and governments and all that sort of stuff, grouped into that sort of sphere, will continue to realize that they can't do anything about Bitcoin. They'll throw FUD. They'll throw the FBI hacked it, the energy is going to boil the oceans. Every year it's boiling the oceans.
My favorite is Senator Warren.
What did Senator Warren say recently?
Yesterday, she had some real good ones.
Please tell me at least one.
I mean, basically, Bitcoin consumes more energy than some countries, and therefore we need to, basically regulate it, control it, get rid of it, whatever nonsense she was saying.
We should ban clothes dryers because that actually consumes more energy than Bitcoin. But anyway. My
favorite is Christmas lights.
Yes, Christmas lights. Thank you.
We're going to cancel Christmas.
Yeah, we should definitely cancel Christmas because it uses up too much energy. So they'll throw everything at it, but they can't beat it. They can't stop it. So I think the best angle of attack, if I was a government, I would go in and I would start supporting something like an Ethereum or something like a Cardano or something like a whatever, one of these other shitcoins. And all you have to do at that stage, so Bitcoin is enforced at the level of the individual. The node operator enforces the rules of Bitcoin. Now, I enforce those rules of Bitcoin for myself, and I do it voluntarily. And I come into consensus with everybody else who's enforcing the same rules. That's what makes Bitcoin so powerful. Whereas with all of these other networks, it's not enforced at the level of individual. There's a foundation, there's a group, there's an institution, there's a coalition, there's a governance structure that decides how this thing runs. Now, if I was the government, I would be becoming friendly with the Joe Lubins and the Vitaliks of the world. Give them as much free reign to sort of hoodwink everyone into this idea of decentralization and, competing with Bitcoin. Proof of stake is the perfect, proof of stake is central banking.
Of course.
That's what it is. So, these guys are going to move over to that. And then whoever runs the largest chunk of stake calls the shots. And if I was a government, I'd come in and say, all right, well, this is how we're going to run things. Now we're going to issue the IMF dollar on Ethereum or whatever.
Well, there's 2 different things. One, they could just spend a bunch of fiat and become the largest, staker, right? Or they could nationalize it.
Or they can do it behind the scenes, man. If I'm someone who's been trying to pull the strings at the IMF or at the central bank or whatever these, 3-letter soup organizations are, I'll just go to dinner with Vitalik and say, this is how it's going to happen. Doesn't matter what you say. and you'll start to see a backflip.
What do you think his reaction would be? I don't know Vitalik, so
I don't know, but
I think that I want to caveat this with it's obvious he's very intelligent. I mean, like scary intelligent. And I'm going to always put, for people I don't know, like I assume that they're doing what they believe is like the best thing. So they're like a good actor. And if they do something that is misplaced, like don't assign malice where ignorance could be the explanation, right? So from that lens, like just game theory it out. Somebody from the existing system comes and sits down with, I don't know, 5 of the largest Ethereum holders and says, we want you to do X. Like, what do they do? What could they do?
What can they do? They can't do shit.
In terms of they can't change the system, or they can't say no?
They can't say no. They can't say no. That's the problem. Like, I mean, we all know what happens to people who disagree with, these large scale organizations. Like, I mean, you've got people with a lot more balls than Vitalik and all of that have, had their countries blown up, taken over, blah, blah, blah.
I was literally just going to ask you, do you think that it's more risky from a nation state vantage point to be the heads of a country that tries to get off the dollar, or to be somebody who, not just Ethereum, but just one of these things that the government decides, hey, we're going to try to leverage this for our benefit, and you don't want to do it?
Ooh,
I still think it's worse to be the nation state head.
Probably. Yeah, probably. It's probably more dangerous to be the nation state head. But yeah, but here's the thing, like, you mentioned before, Vitalik is smart. Everyone thought Elizabeth Holmes was really highly intelligent. And I mean, to an extent she was. Yeah, Theranos, exactly. So like, I actually think Vitalik is not so smart. I think he's highly naive. I think he's like...
You don't think he's smart at all?
No, not really. Because, I mean... Because I understand what he talks about.
Comment.
Dude, I understand what he talks about, and he just talks in fucking circles. Like, that's the thing. Like, he actually doesn't make sense.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. We may disagree on this. What do you disagree with him on? Or what do you think he's wrong on?
His first principles. So, like,
what does that mean?
So, the first principles... He doesn't take a first principles approach to building things.
Okay.
So, like, as an example, he is still of the opinion that, and from the beginning, like, he got sort of laughed at when his suggestions about Bitcoin, we should do smart contracts on the base layer, blah, blah, blah. So he's a bit of he's a naive kid who thinks that Bitcoin and money is just some sort of toy that we can play with. And because he couldn't get his way in Bitcoin, because all his suggestions were stupid, he went off and built his own toy. And because he's intelligent enough to sound intelligent, and because he looks the part, a lot of people buy into the Kool-Aid idea. Like, they sort of take the Kool-Aid and they're like, oh, he's the boy genius, blah, blah, blah. And, you ask someone to explain what Vitalik's actually talking about in a podcast, they'll be like, I don't know, but it sounds smart. So I'll listen to him. So it's like, people don't actually know what the fuck he's talking about half the time. And when you actually listen to the things he says, like, half of the things are contradictory. Like, half of his statements.
Like, give me an example.
Well, his thing about proof of work. Like, he thinks proof of work is inefficient. Proof of work is the most efficient mechanism for doing anything in life. I mean, if you're an artist, what are you doing? Proof of work. If you go to the gym, what are you doing? Proof of work. Like, proof of work permeates all of existence. Proof of stake is a human-created aberration in which a group of people want to have an advantage over another group of people. Like, that's a first principles approach to proof of work. Whereas he's trying to take some high-level abstracted view of, let's tweak some variables up the top here, and we can create a game theoretically sound system. That doesn't matter. Like, what is missing is the actual first principles of why proof of work actually functions. So to me, that tells me he actually doesn't get it. So he's completely missed the point.
Is it possible that he understands that, but thinks that the bigger benefit is the trade-off between getting efficient, like, energy consumption? Let's say that was his thing, right? He wanted to get more efficient energy consumption, and he was willing to trade off the decentralization or the proof of work value, all that stuff?
No, because it's not more efficient in terms of energy. It's not. Proof of stake is actually inefficient.
Okay, explain.
So, okay, let's think about the greatest example of proof of stake at the moment.
You just got real excited, so I'm excited now.
I know. All right, let's go. So proof of stake represents the way the world functions at the moment, right? Like he who has decides and decides for everyone else, not just for himself, right? So what that creates through necessity is layers of bureaucracy. The biggest damage we do to the environment as a species is not the use of fossil fuels. Like fossil fuels is actually a direct extraction of energy from, something that existed beforehand and the use of that energy. So things like, I'm going to go on a slight tangent here and then I'll come back in. Things like, renewable energies and solar panels and wind and all this other stuff. And this is a whole different rabbit hole, but they're actually less energy efficient than fossil fuels. And they do more damage to the environment because the amount of energy consumption that's required to build these things is never actually paid back. When you count up maintenance, when you count up all the other things. And the fact that they're subsidized through the taxation or creation of money, what that actually means is money represents human resources. It represents natural and human resources combined. So when you're actually leeching money from one thing to subsidize something else, the actual real environmental cost of that is a lot higher than what you think it is on paper. So all of this sort of renewable energy stuff is all like one big mess because it actually is not helping us. Like if we put all of that energy, time, and effort into making the extraction of fossil fuels more efficient, I'm going to do a podcast next week with Aleks Epstein. We would have, like, cars would be more efficient. Power plants would be more efficient. Like all of the things that we take for granted today in an energy-rich society would be way more efficient. But coming back to so energy use. So energy use is correlated with it I think is extremely causal with like human prosperity, right? Like the more we do,
the better we do, the more energy we consume.
Exactly. So that's not where the problem is. The problem is all in all the wastage. So when you think about what is required to maintain a system which is built on proof of stake, so government, central banking, all this other stuff, the layers of bureaucracy, the waste, like, for the US to function, you need the military industrial complex. You need the whole banking system. You need Wall Street. Think about all the buildings, the unnecessary people that are hired, all of the crap that goes in there. Like, with governments as well. Like, I mean, the masks thing is a perfect example. 30 billion disposable masks get dumped every month, all because of a moronic mandate. Like all of these misallocations of resources, all of that stuff, basically, we're probably, like, if I had to just take a number out of my ass, like 60, 70, 80% of the energy we use is wasted on stupidity. So the biggest impact Bitcoin's going to have is because it eliminates the wastage, we will actually become a far more efficient society. Consumption goes down. Like we blindly consume shit that we don't need because the incentive is to spend. Like, GDP, gross domestic product, is not a measure of production, it's a measure of consumption. It's everything's fucking ass backwards. So tying that to proof of stake is that kind of a system trends towards bureaucracy, it trends towards waste because it's not tethered to proof of work. So proof of work drives efficiency because it's tied or it's tethered to the second law of thermodynamics. That's actually what creates efficiency. When you create these abstractions, you move away from reality and you don't know what you're doing and you waste. And waste is actually what destroys the environment, destroys resources, destroys energy, wastes energy, etc.
So is it fair to say you think proof of stake, if I had to categorize your argument, it is one, those who are rich get to call the shots, which is a direct kind of comparison or evolution from what we already have. Mm-hmm. And then two is proof of work drives a level of efficiency because less percentage of the energy that is consumed is used for wasteful purposes versus proof of stake would end up being high waste regardless of the total energy consumption.
Correct. Proof of stake will turn to waste. It'll trend that way. In the beginning, it may not. In the beginning, I mean, proof of stake, the stake is represented by an amount of capital. Now, capital.
When do you think they're actually going to do the update?
I actually heard there's some more delays now. So it's like now it's 2024 apparently. Because
Really?
they have to build a scaffolding that sort of sits below. So then you need to stake a bunch of ETH or some shit like that on the scaffolding, and then you can't take that off. So it's like it's stuck there until that's sort of ready, and then they have to merge everything across. Dude, ain't gonna happen for another couple of years.
Does it ever happen?
Probably not. And who really cares?
I think it happens. I agree with you though that it takes a longer time.
I mean, at this point, like the whole thing we're trying to do here with Bitcoin is we're trying to transform the world from one in which any authority has the capacity to decide for somebody else. Like, I don't want some bureaucrat who's never met me to decide what I should do with my money, with my life, with my decisions, or any of that sort of stuff. So Bitcoin ushers in a world of sovereign individualism. That doesn't mean every man for himself. Like, this is something we need to sort of like clarify, because whenever people hear this, it's like, so what? Everyone's going to live in their own cardboard box or in their own bunker and like sort of war. That's not what happens. Human beings, like, do you have friends? Of course you do. I mean, I hope. I have friends. Like, what do friends do? Are we forced to have friends? No, like we find people that we align with, that we have similar values with, and we create these communities. They're emergent, they're bottom up. And so Bitcoin enables a world in which we can actually do that voluntarily and by our own volition, as opposed to being forced into these, group identity politics and all this sort of shit, by morons who think they know better for everybody else because they don't have any discipline in their own lives. So it's like that, like a politician or a bureaucrat or a central banker or someone who like doesn't have any capacity to have control in their own life. So they want to control everyone else's life. And all we're seeing with crypto and all of this stuff is just a replication of that, but just in a digital form. Like, we don't need a group of nerds to replace a group of bankers. Like, they're the same thing. It's just one's just a younger version of it.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say replacing the bankers with the nerds, but proof of stake for sure. Whoever has the most gets it. What about the critique of that says, well, that just means you have more skin in the game, and therefore, because you have skin in the game, you actually protect the network?
I guess that is a critique. So you've got more skin in the game and you protect the network. That, in a way, I agree with, right? Because like I've actually said this, me and Gladstein were discussing this about voting. I was like, if you don't pay taxes, you shouldn't get a vote, basically. And what that actually trends towards is voting just actually being an economic decision. So you abolish voting altogether, and the only voting that anyone partakes in is what you buy. Like your purchase is your vote. So you vote for the car you want to buy by buying it. But in this sense, the problem we've got with it is that, yes, you've got more skin in the game, and yes, you should have the right to make the decision, but money, how the money functions, should not be anyone's decision. It should be enforced at the level of the individual. And it, like, there's a joke which is, God gave humanity money and he fucked up. Like, I'm paraphrasing, it's something different, but that's kind of what it is, right? So like, money should be outside of all of our hands. No matter who's got the biggest or lowest stake, like the rules of money should sit completely outside of anybody's hands. So
and so is that gold would fit in there?
Gold kind of fits in there, exactly, because it's a metal. We can't change the chemical properties of the metal, so it exists as that. Gold just has physical properties that make it prone to being held in large quantities by certain authorities.
So the whole idea of sound money, it's outside the system. You can't create more of it, and therefore that makes it that quote unquote sound money. It's just that Bitcoin's a digital version, gold's a physical version. Correct,
but Bitcoin actually. So remember before I was saying money is this thing that permeates all of existence. So money is like a meta idea or a meta energy or information at its very like purest form. Bitcoin makes money information again. So, Bitcoin's like slogan should be make money great again. Like that's sort of the thing. So it puts it out of reach of all of us. So none of us can play God with anybody else. So again, like the idea of having extra skin in the game to call the shots makes sense, but not for the mechanism via which human action is measured, right? And that's money. Like, that's the most important thing. Once we've got that out of the way, we can do everything else. Like, we move into a world of, and this is, maybe another unpopular opinion is like, we don't need decentralization. Decentralization has one reason to exist, and that is for censorship resistance. And we need censorship resistance on money. All the other stuff, we can compete our way into better products and services. And so I think the future that Bitcoin gives us is not a future of all these decentralized products and decentralized finance, all this other crap. That's all noise in the short term. In the long term, what will happen is we will have competing companies, competing ideas, competing entrepreneurs, all this sort of stuff, competing their way to better products and services because they can't get regulatory arbitrage. They can't grow big and then socialize their losses when they fuck up. They can't get excess capital that the little guys can't get because they're close enough to the monetary spigot. So all of that stuff gets removed, and we actually live in a world where we get this dynamic inequality. So we'll still have the 80-20 going, like we'll still have larger companies and smaller companies, but we'll actually be competing in a way that is not unfair. Today, like if I want to create a Twitter competitor, Twitter gets access to public money, to 401k money, to like all this money. There is not a chance in hell I could ever compete with them. But in a world in which all of that funny money doesn't exist, where we have to compete on merit, I could compete with a Twitter. So we start to actually, we don't level out the playing field, but we create an 80-20 instead of a 99.9, 0.01. And that's like, we live in a world of unnatural inequality today, whereas Bitcoin will sort of bring in natural inequality, and it'll be dynamic. As opposed to static.
Talk about Amber and what you guys are doing lately.
All right. So Amber is still only in Australia. So things, surprise, surprise, take longer to do. But the app is really stable in Australia. It is the best way to buy Bitcoin in Oz. We actually introduced Amber Black. So this is the bomb. So you just pay a membership fee, and you can buy and sell as much Bitcoin as you want. There's no fees. But more importantly, you get like a series of cool features. So you can like auto withdraw to your cold storage. And then my favorite button is the auto buy the dip. So you can set an if this then that function. So like if Bitcoin falls X% in 24 hours, buy me this much Bitcoin. So that's like the best button ever. So you can stack on normal DCA, and like while you're sleeping, if the price of Bitcoin dips, you can extra stack. So that's where the product is at the moment. Next step for us is in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be rolling out the beta for the US. So, if anyone wants to try it out, DM us. I think the handle is at the Amber app with the THE at the front. So the Amber app. But DM us or follow us or whatever, and we'll get you going on the beta. So when we land in the US, it's only going to be Amber Basic. So Amber Black won't come straight away. We just got to get, grease up all the gears and stuff and make sure it's all functioning. So we'll do that. Very shortly thereafter, we're going to look at introducing an Amber debit card. So the whole point will be to save your Bitcoin, spend your fiat, right? And so we'll link that up.
Good strategy.
Absolutely. Like that's what everyone should do. Like my whole goal is actually to build mini Michael Saylors inside the app. So that way you build up, like, I always say this when people say, oh, so what's different to Amber than like than a Coinbase? I'm like, well, Coinbase wants you to trade. Like they literally want you. It's a shitcoin casino. That's what I call it. And Amber, like what we want you to do is build enduring wealth in the form of Bitcoin. And everything is designed for you to accumulate Bitcoin. So it's a Bitcoin accumulation app. It's not a trading app. And when you do that, hey, you might have some fiat in there. You might have topped up your account. I want people to use it as a bank account, but also as their Bitcoin savings account. And then we're gonna integrate Lightning and Layer 1, a Bitcoin wallet in there, so that way you can actually interact with the Bitcoin world, and you'll with your debit card, and then depending on which jurisdiction, you'll have a functional fiat account in there, so you can receive your pay, you can send money, so that way you're connected to both worlds, and it'll act as this bridge over time. And then we'll link the Bitcoin account with the fiat account through being able to borrow fiat against your Bitcoin. So in that sense, you've got like a constant credit line inside the app where you never have to sell your Bitcoin. If you need some fiat, emergency, borrow $500 against your Bitcoin. It locks it up in there in a multi-sig. We won't rehypothecate. We won't do any of that. And then that way you can spend. So that way you've actually got like a Bitcoin bank in your pocket that talks to both worlds. Mm-hmm. So, if you're in El Salvador and you need to buy something, use Lightning. If you're in America or in Australia, use your debit card. Like you'll have the options, and you can take Amber with you anyway. So that's sort of the plan. But in the short term, next step, US, and then we'll look at other places.
And this is pretty much all retail, right? If you're an individual, this is for you.
100%.
What has been the biggest surprise over the last 12 months in terms of building it?
The biggest surprise or biggest challenge?
Both.
Okay. Biggest challenge has been getting good devs, man. Like, good product people. So what's hard in the Bitcoin space is you get one of two things. You get people who are like hardcore Bitcoiners who really, 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 really get Bitcoin, but they haven't had the experience in like sort of building tech, right? Or building a tech company. So you sort of got one side lacking. Then on the other side, you get like people who had loads of experience building product, building tech, doing all that stuff, but they don't get Bitcoin. So like trying to find the unicorn that gets both, that's a real challenge. And we're on the hunt for people, particularly
for the best. For the best.
Exactly. We're on the hunt for the best. Like we need Bitcoin product unicorns. So that's sort of that piece. Surprise wise, I mean, I don't know. I think I haven't been. Actually, probably one thing is just like the level of stupidity of some of the legacy financial institutions that we like deal with back in Australia. Like I won't name any names here, but like one of the partners we're working with has an upper limit on volume. I was like, I'm trying to give you more money. I'm literally trying to give you more customers, and you charge me per customer. So I'm like literally trying to give you, and they're like, sorry, we can't accept it. I was like, what kind of an industry like operates like that?
Why do they do that? It's like a fraud prevention or something?
Some risk thing. But like we actually have less of a default rate than a gym. So but we're in a higher risk category. So it's like it just, this is again like a ramification of the fiat world. Instead of, the market deciding, which is, the market says that we're a safer product than your gym down around the corner. The regulator says that we're a much higher risk and therefore should not be allowed to direct debit more than a certain amount. It's complete madness. So that's a surprise.
It's fascinating to me how backwards it seems sometimes.
Dude, it's
and sometimes there's good reason, but also sometimes maybe not.
The thing is, a lot of the times the reason that started back here upstream, it was a good brain fart, like, we should do this. The problem is when it's mandated as a blanket solution to something, what happens is all regulations end up being designed such that it's harder for legitimate people to do anything, because like in order to stop a bad actor with a regulation or a rule, you have to blanket everyone. So you have to basically screw everyone over. But then the bad actor, all they do is just figure out a way around the regulation anyway. So what you've done is you haven't stopped the bad actor, you've actually inhibited all the good actors. That's why regulations don't work. Like that's why bureaucrats just need to get the fuck out of the way and let us innovate, because the fact that there's more good actors is we'll outcompete them. But we're getting handicapped. The good guys are getting handicapped and the bad guys are just doing what they want to do anyway. So this is why none of that stuff works.
I think that the system is messed up and it will get changed.
I didn't know you thought that.
I mean, yeah, it's just the incentive is to have those in power keep the system in place, and for those not in power to change it.
Well, of course. I mean, that's always been the case. I actually just think that this time it's going to be the greatest shift that's ever happened in humanity. Like literally this, if Bitcoin doesn't win, like if Bitcoin doesn't break the state, which I think we've already won by the way, but if Bitcoin doesn't, we are going to either blow ourselves up or we're going to become like a big collectivist dystopia in which like, UBI and all this sort of stuff, what it does is it actually rips the soul out of humanity. Like again, Macedonia is a great example, is, in order to equalize society, in order to equalize humans, you can't force people upwards. But you can force them down. And that's what happens. And you get that through force, but you also get it through the malaligned incentive of, if you work harder than I do, but we get the same thing, what are you going to think? I'll be like, fuck this guy, I'm going to work less. But then as you work less, then I'm going to be like, man, he's working less now, so I'm going to work less. And you get this downward spiral. And that's effectively what's happening. So when you look at society, people are going to start getting free money just to sort of be placated so that they don't go out and riot. But at the same time, you get this sort of equalization effect that, everyone's the same and we're all equal, all in this together. Like, we're fucking not. But, apparently, the state likes to say that we are. So as we do that, we actually kill the spirit of overachievers. We kill the spirit of the 20% who do 80% of the effort. And in doing so, we hollow out society and we make it weaker. So like we're getting weakness through safety instead of getting strength through freedom. Mm-hmm. And that they're two divergent paths. And, Bitcoin is a counter to that. But, if it doesn't win, we end up in a world in which like things get worse and worse and worse and worse. Like we erode the capital that we've spent millennia building. People get more and more empty. The whole WEF, you'll have nothing, you'll have no privacy and you'll be happy, like staring into the camera, like, I swear I'll be happy. And like that's sort of the future that we're moving into, which conspiracy theories aside, like it doesn't even need a conspiracy theory to.
No, they're just saying it.
Like but even beyond them saying it, like they actually think it's a good idea. Like,
of course, I'm a big believer that most people who do dumb things don't think that they're bad people, and they don't think that what they're doing is wrong. They're just literally dumb people.
Correct. And the problem is that the dumbest of the dumb are the bureaucrats who are actually deciding where resources should go, how people should operate, what people should think, what they should be taught at school, what they should put in their bodies. Like there was just the best meme the other day, the Belgian health minister, like the one that looks like Jabba the Hutt. And there was this other guy who's like a personal trainer who didn't want to get the vaccine. So one of them has a health passport and the other one doesn't. And like, I was looking at that, I'm like, man, like, so it's just wild, right? And unless Bitcoin wins, we're going to be living this sort of Twilight Zone disaster. And that doesn't bode well for the human species. Mm-hmm. Like, it really doesn't bode well. Like, at some point, we'll wreck ourselves. Like, either the energy grid will fall apart. And what a lot of people don't know, and I don't want to get too doomsday-ish here, but as we start to like do this moronic push to like, eliminate fossil fuels and all this sort of stuff, like California's already a disaster, right? Like, we're going to break things that were built that we don't even know why they were built in the first place. And like, people don't realize how like interconnected, especially modern society is, and how fragile it is. Mm-hmm. Like, you break one chunk of the supply chain, things get really, really bad really, really quickly. Like, food breaks down, energy breaks down, heat breaks down. Like, we saw it in Texas last year, like really briefly, or if it was early this year or whatever it was. But that's a bad place. And Bitcoin is the only thing I think that exists today that really has a chance of counteracting that. And that's where I get annoyed, with all the crypto people and all the blockchain people. Like, we've got this thing here that fundamentally changes the base incentives of society. Like, if you remember from Sovereign Individual, like the whole thesis about changing the returns on violence, right? We move away, like, by lowering the cost of defense and increasing the cost of attack, you actually change human behavior. You change how society functions. But more importantly, what Bitcoin does is it actually transforms the individual's relationship with three things: with energy, with their own time, which includes, their relationship with their own future, and with natural resources. So what that means is like we actually start to have a lower time preference and more of a respect for the things that we have, because we actually have wealth. We can save. We're more discerning about the way we spend. And you start to create a better individual. And when you create a better individual, you make the world better. And that's the genesis of the Bitcoin Fixes This meme. So that grassroots foundational shift, what that does is it gives us tracks that don't lead off the cliff. Like, at the moment, all we're doing with crypto, blockchain, fintech, government, politics, like all this shit is we're fighting over which person is driving the train that's going right off the fucking cliff. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin says, here's a new track. This one's going to a nice like green pasture. Like, let's go on this one. And that's what Bitcoiners have realized. And we're like, what the fuck are you idiots arguing over the train wreck for? You're literally going to run off a cliff, and you're trying to keep us all on the train. You're not letting us off. Like, we are actively exiting and we're jumping on a different train. And that's the theory.
I think that's how it works. Where can we send people to find you on the internet?
I used to be on @AleksSvetsky at Twitter, so we need to find a way to get my ass back on there. But at the moment, I'm Ghost of Svetsky on Twitter.
Okay.
But if you search my surname SVETSKI, you'll find me on Medium. What else do I do? Oh, actually, I've got a podcast apparently called the Wake Up Podcast. So, I've got like lots of broad guests. We go into philosophy, psychology, energy, like we're going to do carnivore, like all sorts of random stuff. So there, and then check out amber.app to keep an eye on what we're doing with Amber and when we're bringing it to the US and stuff.
Amber.app and then Ghost of Svetsky on Twitter. Hopefully the real one will come back at some point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Listen, thank you so much for doing this. We'll definitely have to do it again in the future.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you.